To kick off the discussions, we do have a leadership panel, and our moderator for this session is Mr. Juan Bordenson, Technology Editor for Clarion in Argentina. Mr. Bordenson reports on cybersecurity, PC, and tech-related books. He is also professor at the University of Tocatoy de Tela and Universidad de San Andrés. If I can pass the stage to you, Juan.
Yeah, sure. You hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you. Great,
that's awesome. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. As a tech journalist, I've been focusing on cybersecurity beat in Argentina. And just a reminder, in the last couple of years, we had a huge data breach here in Argentina that leaked Migrations Office sensitive information, then thousands of citizens' documents with critical personal data also got leaked, and even the Senate got hit by a ransomware this year in January. So Argentina is just a sample. Okay, this year Latin American Caribbean region had 137 billion threats from January till June. That's 50% more comparing to last period. This information is from FortiGuard Labs. Not only states are in this situation, also companies, organizations, medical centers, and critical infrastructure, which is very concerning, are facing these problems. But we're here to discuss this with the experts, so I'm very excited to introduce them to you. But we are here also to try to figure out what's going on in the industry, because every expert in the field states that they are short of people to work on cybersecurity. More specifically, the market is struggling with a cybersecurity workforce. That's men and women that can tackle this problem. So I've been thinking about some talking points. Feel free to go where you think the discussion could lead. First of all, our speaker is Rodney Peterson, Director of National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. And the first question that I had in mind was, what is NIST and what is this framework, and how can it helps to solve these problems? Hello, Peter.
Yeah, good morning, and great to be with everyone. Thanks for joining us for this special event. I do want to also just send my greetings and thanks to Assistant Secretary General Mendez, good friend and colleague Liesl Franz from the Department of State, our partners at FIU, Brian, who's joining us now, and Randy and Paola, and Carrie Ann, good to see you as always, and thanks for the partnership with OAS. So, I think the NICE framework, which Liesl kind of teed up, is a common taxonomy and lexicon for describing cybersecurity work that has been in progress in the United States for several years and resulted in a NIST special publication in 2017, goes by the number 800-171, but it's a workforce framework for cybersecurity that really features building blocks that talks about tasks from an employer's perspective, the work that needs to be done, and then the knowledge and skills that are necessary to perform those tasks. It's also used to create work roles as well as competency areas. And the uses for the NICE framework are many, but you heard Liesl kind of reference how in the United States, the federal government, including Department of Commerce, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, everybody across the federal government applies this framework to assign codes according to the 52 work roles to their personnel so that we can assess the workforce and then also identify gaps. And so there's a variety of ways that it can be used, not only in the federal government, but in the private sector for workforce assessment, gap analysis, and writing position descriptions. Another audience that uses it is education and training providers. So as they're developing curriculum or certificates or degree programs and other credentials that they can teach or help students learn the type of knowledge and skills that are required for these jobs that are defined in the framework. And then, of course, there are those students or job seekers or existing employees who can use the framework to help better define their career pathway and identify areas where they need to improve their skills and experiences in order to qualify for cybersecurity work. One more thing I would just quickly mention is that we unfortunately have a workforce that's going to be increasingly mobile. And I say unfortunately because a lot of people want to retain their talent forever, but for a variety of reasons, employers are going to move from one organization to another. So the NICE framework really facilitates mobility, both from that learner's perspective, but also from the employer's perspective. So I think there's a lot of benefit to having this common framework that we can all work from.
Great. Why is it so important to have a common lexicon? Because is it something that I've been hearing a lot?
Yeah, so aside from the uses I just talked about, the other big question, which again, we heard the Assistant Secretary General refer to, is how many open jobs are there nationally, internationally, even within a sector like the federal government? And if you don't know what kind of workforce you're counting or defining, then you don't know where to start. And so, as a specific example of that, we've invested in a website called Cyberseek. Cyberseek.org is a way that we periodically determine the number of open jobs in the United States, as well as those that are employed in cybersecurity. Our latest data that was released just 3 weeks ago during our Cybersecurity Career Awareness Week shows that there's over 770,000 open jobs, while there's over 1 million people employed in cybersecurity. But if we didn't have a framework that helped us define and know what kind of positions and work roles we're looking for, we couldn't begin to do that kind of assessment to know what we're striving to do.
Okay, and what about the implementation of this effort to have this common lexicon and so on, about the languages, about the availability, where can people access to it, and so on?
Yeah, so alignment to the NICE framework is something we always encourage, but people are going to align or implement very differently. And I described, by federal law, the federal government uses it to assess and kind of determine workforce gaps. Increasingly, we're seeing it used for position descriptions and for performance plans and performance assessment as well. I think the key thing, though, to understand is that even though we think of cybersecurity as those who maybe do defense of cyberspace when things go bad, cybersecurity is much broader than that. In fact, it's more proactive than that. So if we think about those who are discovering, designing, developing solutions, whether they be a software developer or an architect, or even persons who are doing research and development for next generation solutions, we need to build security in by design, and they're part of that workforce we're trying to define as well as assess and as well as develop. And then, of course, it includes all the people who are operating and maintaining technology who have a role to play. And then all the way to the other end, those who have to investigate cyber crimes, law enforcement, those who do digital forensics. So it's a pretty broad and all-encompassing framework that really affects the enterprise, whether the enterprise is a company or a government or a university. It's something that really affects the risk management of an entire organization.
Great. And you said cybersecurity by design. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so often, especially commercial providers of technology and solutions are motivated by profit, and they're motivated by speed of getting products to market. And cybersecurity isn't always a priority, isn't even always a selling point. And we need to change that paradigm, one, to make cybersecurity something that people recognize and value when they buy products and services. But secondly, to be able to shift the resources away from just defending and addressing problems and vulnerabilities and threats, and move it back towards the more proactive measures of building it in at the very beginning. You're seeing a lot of that movement already in the United States, especially in the federal government, through executive actions and orders that are requiring software development to be more secure. The government, as a big procurement of software and other products and services, are really putting our weight behind that to not have to invest in securing it after the fact, but making sure the providers are seeing the value in securing it up front.
Sorry, just to sum up, what would you say is the biggest challenge from your point of view that you're facing, and what can NICE tackle down as a biggest challenge?
So we often talk about the numbers of people needed in the cybersecurity workforce, and I think we understand that. A lesser understood or challenge that we have to address is bringing in underrepresented communities and populations. Cybersecurity and IT and technology in general tends to be a white and male dominated occupation. And we need to change that to not only bring in more women and by reference, more young girls and people into that pipeline, but also more people of color, people with disabilities, look at populations like transitioning veterans, people who want to reskill, improve their employment opportunities. So I think the efforts on diversity, equity, inclusion, and equality that we're seeing broadly in the United States need to really be applied rigorously to cybersecurity. And not only does it help us diversify the cybersecurity workforce, but it really helps us bring in some of that talent that we need.
Great. Thank you very much, Rodney, for your time.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, we have Carrie Ann Barrett. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing okay. Sorry, I will ask you how to pronounce it, but we actually met this year in Washington in May. So nice to see you again. And she's a cybersecurity program manager at the cybersecurity program at the Organization of American States, or OEA, as we call it in Spanish, OAS in English. And I wanted to ask you, what role does OAS play in this fight against cybercrime?
I mean, more generally, the OAS addresses both cybersecurity and cybercrime. And one of the things that we look at from the cybersecurity perspective is all the way in 2004, the OAS actually established a cybersecurity strategy for the region. And it actually identified the need for establishing incident response teams at the regional level to share information. It spoke to the need to have national cybersecurity strategies on a whole. And more importantly, it also spoke to the need to work with multi-stakeholders to ensure that we have information sharing and research on the topic. Since 2004, one of the things that we have worked on, we established a cybersecurity program, which is where we actually do capacity building for member states, specifically on cybersecurity. So I think more broadly, that would be the first answer.
Great. So how can the OAS, do you think, help to build a highly skilled workforce, but to educate in this issue that we are addressing here today?
Thanks, Juan, for the question, because I think one of the things that, just to continue on what Rodney suggested, and he posited as things that we could think about in the region, most of the countries in our region has been comprehensively working on national cybersecurity strategies. And as a component of that, it speaks to workforce development at the national level. It's really important that public agencies and private sector agencies, despite their focus on digital or skills, still have that gap. And one of the things that OAS did recently with Cisco was that we published a report, and it was launched on November 10th. And the report was on the development of the cybersecurity workforce in the era of talent and skills shortage. This book.
You're on mute, Carrie. Yes.
The report focuses on three main perspectives. It looked at the challenge, the issues from a supply side to actually think about why aren't there enough cybersecurity training opportunities. It looked at the demand side, and it delved into how organizations can reduce their staffing needs by automating, for example, or re-educating. Rodney spoke about reskilling. And finally, it looked at it from the perspective of governments in terms of those who are responsible for creating the policy and the environment and the ecosystem to foster a cybersecurity labor market. I wanted to just share with you quickly that at an organizational level, we're able to have that bird's eye view to start identifying the needs in the region. And some of the challenges that we've seen is that, one, from the demand side, there's isolated efforts for workforce development and partnerships. You have different organizations doing it, but there's no comprehensive approach at the national level. There isn't a lot of strategic information for decision making on it. So making the case to the decision maker to allocate the budget needed for a technical team or for a policy team that focuses on cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And there's actually not enough awareness on what are the resources and tools available. So someone may say to you, hey, I want to start a career in cybersecurity. They don't know where to start. They automatically believe they have to be a hacker to be able to go into the field. And cybersecurity, if you look at the NICE framework, the roles are so much wider than just technical skills. It covers everything from policy all the way down to networking, everything. From the supply side, some of the things that we're identifying is a lack of awareness and education at an early stage that this is a possible career. There's insufficient access to educational offerings, whether it be that most persons only have access to it virtually, so they can't pay for it because sometimes it's an expensive certification. And there's ignorance of the different routes that someone can take into this career path. So the short answer is, as an organization, knowing the challenges, it's our job to now develop very specific capacity building efforts or technical assistance to support our member states in mainstreaming workforce development in their countries to ensure that they have a cyclical rule or cyclical group of persons that will come up in cybersecurity.
Great. We are a little short on time, so I want to move towards Brian. But I remember that when we met, we talked about a zero trust strategy. And this is something that can lead to Brian expertise, because he's executive director of cybersecurity at Florida International University, but as a professor, he's author of books related to national security and threat analysis. So I wanted to ask you, Brian, and thanks for being here. What's the trending cyber attack right now? And if zero trust is some kind of way to educate and to tackle this problem down?
Thanks, Juan. I appreciate it. First and foremost, let me just shout out to Carrie Ann and Rodney. It's always an honor to sit on a panel with you, although I've sat in the audience on many occasions listening to you. And so here I am up on the big stage with both of you. So it's amazing. And one, of course, brilliant moderation so far. So I think, first off, we need probably a dozen more sessions just to cover the talk about sort of trajectory and cyber threats. But I think one that I'll highlight and that I've been working on very intimately is, I think, the increasing surge against public sector. I think one of the things that we're seeing is a surge in cyber attacks against public sector organizations, local governments, because they represent, serious vulnerabilities that hackers are able to sort of target for a variety of reasons. And so I want to highlight that as what I think is one among many trends in cyberspace. And we're starting to see a lot more pressure being placed on local governments, provincial governments, nations, to build resilience in public administrations. And so if you look at some of the pervasive security threats, cybersecurity threat or attack vectors that are occurring, of course, ransomware seems to pop up at the top of the list, in which a lot of smaller organizations are being forced into a position to either pay the ransom or lose really important data that keeps sort of local government kind of churning. And so I think you got ransomware, you got, of course, phishing attacks. Hacktivist organizations are also on the rise and sort of attacking public organizations in ways that try to impact brand reputation or extract some reciprocating policy provisions in some way, and leveraging cyber as a vector to do that. And then, of course, you have insider threats and attacks against critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure often, that sort of sits, in that seam between private and public sectors, because private sectors have so much equity in critical infrastructure. But nonetheless, I think you see those particular attack vectors occurring at increased pace in public sector organizations. And to that degree, I think public sector organizations represent some serious vulnerabilities that maybe are still being outpaced by private sector investments in securing cyberspace. And so, right off the bat, that public organizations are becoming increasingly connected. Obviously, the post-COVID environment has pushed so many, organizations into the virtual space that were ill-equipped or prepared to do that, and do that in a safe sort of environment. The poorly trained staff, and so across many public organizations, there's a lack of training and competency, not just across general staff, but also across leadership, in terms of leadership's understanding on how to build resilience against attacks, and of course upskilling of IT professionals. So right now at Florida International University, we're working on an important project with the state of Florida to implement a series of training programs across the state to try to build resilience in the public sector. And so earlier in the year, our state's legislature passed law that required new reporting provisions for local governments that were ill-equipped to do that, and mandated training across the public administration space. And so they've mandated general cyber training for all public employees, right, as a first line of defense to protect, the integrity of public organizations. And then they mandated the upskilling of IT professionals, because oftentimes public organizations find it really hard to compete with the private sector for really talented, skilled technical workers. And so upskilling IT professionals that have committed to public services is another part of that task. And then finally, the area that we're working mostly on is helping prepare executive and managers in public organizations to build resilience, right? Everything from understanding the threat vector to understanding how to develop strategy, something that the OES is phenomenal at coaching and supporting nations across the hemisphere in building, preparing for incident response, understanding sort of the nuanced leadership requirements on public administration leadership in this new cyberspace. And of course, weaving in things like the NICE framework is critical, because it's so important to have, again, that sort of uniformed best practice to pitch into the ecosystem that small organizations that lack a whole lot of resources can adopt very quickly. Another element that we're seeing, I think that's really important, particularly in this workforce space, and without delving too much into what I know some of the following panels are going to discuss, but is the preparedness of human resource organizations to be able to staff talent in their organization. I think that's another real important benefit of the NICE framework, is that it enables human resources, provide leadership and bringing technical talent into the organization. And so again, probably a lot more threats we can talk about. I think public sector attacks on the rise, I think, is a very concerning one. Just because it undermines, provisions of government. And of course, this concept of zero trust, I think, is a really important sort of concept, and I think it's designed to be sort of a cultural default of zero trust, in which, you think security at the forefront of decision making, especially when it comes to interaction in cyberspace. So I can go on, but I know we're limited on time. So Juan, I'll stop there and I'll take any follow-on questions you might have.
Yes, I have some questions here, but you mentioned something about reporting, and I couldn't help to think about how difficult it is for us, for journalists, to report sometimes, because companies, states, they usually say, no, nothing happened, we got a situation, but it's all contained. And when you talk to your sources, you find out that something has happened. So how important is transparency towards this topic?
I mean, I think transparency is critical to your point. It enables us certainly a better understanding of what we're seeing in the attack space. But it's a really difficult policy issue to parse out. And I'll tell you why. I mean, you hear from small businesses, medium-sized businesses that depend so much on brand and reputation and consumer confidence, overly concerned that, publicly declaring or reporting an incident might undermine consumer confidence and ultimately lead to sort of going out of business, right? And you get some of those same provisions in which, public organizations are also concerned about reporting about the sort of the blame and shame that they're going to feel in sort of a public and a consumer confidence space that I think also undermines that. That said, I think there is an increasing pressure on all organizations to report in a healthy, an intentional way to minimize some of the fallout or the second, third order effects of reporting, but also ensure that as a community, we continue to keep everyone abreast of sort of the trends and patterns in cyberspace. And that's no different, particularly in this space of incident reporting. And so very tense subject for many, but it's a policy issue that continues to evolve. And I think evolving towards the better, in which you are seeing mandatory reporting requirements moving through different legislatures, not just nationally, but discussions internationally about reporting requirements. And I think it's an important and consequential discussion to have that hopefully will get us to a point where there's greater transparency with far less collateral damage to organizations that do report those attacks.
Great, thank you. I have some question here from the Q&A that is pretty interesting from Jay. That says, as Karian mentioned, certification programs are expensive and require a lot of time. This is true from one that is already employed. So what other options are there to get some sort of certification or recognition in order to pursue a career in cybersecurity?
I mean, from my perspective, and Brian is the educator and Rodney has more knowledge than me with these things, but from a regional perspective, we tend to encourage persons to take up the opportunity of advancing some of their skill sets and knowledge through some of the open source tools and courses that are available. Coursera has a lot, and even through the OAS, we try to partner with very key institutions to offer some of this. For example, through our Cyber Women Challenge that we do with Trend Micro. Through that, we've been able to partner with Platzi, with AWS, with Cisco, to be able to give certified trainings to some of our the winners from those challenges. And I don't know if Brian and Rodney could probably chime in on this as well.
Yeah, I'll throw into the chat here. We have a list of free and low-cost training resources that are online, and it's not the end all, but it's a great starting point, especially for those that are looking for affordable options. I think also pursuing scholarship and support opportunities, which may be provided by an employer, but certainly through local workforce innovation education boards as well. It is an area we're very concerned about as well, keeping the cost affordable, but I'll put the link in the chat to this list that we've been curating.
Yes, so the only thing I would add, and Carrie Ann and Rodney, I think are right on, but I would add that, you know, we have to disaggregate universal cyber education from, you know, IT cyber professionals, right? I think universal cyber education is something that is out there. It is accessible. There are so many resources in the public domain that organizations can fold in to at least help build some resilience. We're still seeing that, you know, phishing attacks, people clicking on the link is still one of the most, you know, popular, you know, forms of attack, you know, into organizations. And so I think a first line of defense is just, you know, encouraging a cultural change that embraces universal cyber education in ways that they serve as a first line of defense for organizations. Now, on top of that, you start thinking about, okay, well, how do I upskill or reskill professionals that we want to work in the technical spaces? And here there are multiple options. I mean, obviously, as a university, you know, we promote the pursuit of, you know, 4-year, you know, plus 2-year, you know, undergraduate and graduate degree programs. But I don't think that's enough really to kind of surge with the workforce that's needed to fill the gap. You know, over 700,000 jobs just in the United States alone that are still vacant. So how do you fill that? You can't fill that with graduates coming out of traditional universities. So I think you need to lean on a mix of short and midterm training programs, certifications, these 0 to hero boot camps that last 16 weeks that can take someone with very limited skill sets and give them certifications to land them in technical positions. And a lot of that support, by the way, I mean, there's lots of free, free content out there that aligns and maps to certifications that minimize the cost needed to be able to acquire at least some basic skills that put you on a pathway to capturing certifications or professional education programs. And I mean, there's a really complex mix of educational, you know, opportunities out there. And I think we just have to be really intentional, and organizations have to be really intentional, put those opportunities in front of individuals. What's also great, and again, I'm gonna give another plug to Rodney and a plug to Carrie Ann, because I have to. But you know, for Rodney, the NICE framework in CyberSeek tells you exactly what credentials are in most demand across the different, you know, work roles. And I didn't have to give a shout to Karen, but I always do, because I'm so privileged to be, you know, to be in her, you know, be a partner of the OAS. OAS does a lot of this in capacity building, and they offer so many opportunities that, again, align with what the workforce needs are. And I think organizations just have to be really intentional to take advantage of it.
Okay, I was checking out the URL that Rodney pasted on the chat. It's very interesting. It has lots of information. So yeah, maybe you guys could send that over the email to the participants. So there's no doubt that a unified framework, it's like a pillar or a basis to tackle these problems. As long as cyber attacks and cybercrime is getting more professional, just to say it this way, and with the Russia invasion, also we have wipers very as a threat that is trending. So this is a problem that continues to grow. So thank you, Brian, Rodney, and Kerry, for your time. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you guys. You are experts. I'm just a journalist. I just talk to you and try to explain to people these things. I think that it's very important also, but you are a really highly skilled source in all of this. in all of these subjects. So thank you very much for your time, and Paola will take it from here.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Juan.
you. Thank you, Juan, and to Brian, Carrie Ann, and Rodney so much for all your welcomes and further resources. So I highly suggest our attendees look for those. And to our speakers, we do have some Q&A. If you want to address them, feel free to. We'll continue to address some of the questions live as we have the time.